So today we're going to talk about debt. And I figured a good place to start is talking about kind of the capital stack. The capital stack is basically how the money is in a deal, right? So the easiest capital stack to think about is your own house. So if you own your personal residence, then there's kind of two parties, right? There's the bank, and then there's you. So the bank will give you maybe, let's say, 80% of the value of the property. So we'll say 80% of loan to value at that very specific time. So it's a snapshot. And then the rest of the money is your down payment, right? So then 20% is what we'd call common equity. So that's kind of most deals. So a lot of syndication deals are very similar where they'll have senior debt, so any type of loan, and then they'll have the common equity, which is us investors, right? Where it gets a little bit more complicated is when you add in other players. So, for example, you can have mezzanine loans, which is a second loan. So, for our same example of your own house, sometimes you could get a HELOC, right? Home equity line of credit. That's a second loan on top of the senior debt. So, because they are second to the senior debt, they will often give you a higher interest rate. So, for example, my house, my senior debt is 2.3%. I got it at a great time. And right now, I have a HELOC. It would be around 8 or 9% because they have a higher risk, right? They only get paid after the senior debt get paid, right? So that is mezzanine debt. What is after debt? So the higher you go, the later people get paid. So senior debt, subordinate debt, also called junior debt or mezzanine debt. Next is preferred equity. And we didn't see that as much before, but you're kind of starting to see that more commonly. And preferred equity is somewhere between debt and equity. And I'll kind of talk about the benefits and pros and cons a little bit later. And lastly, you have common equity. So that's us as the investors. We put in the down payment and we buy the property, right? So pros and cons of each. So senior debt usually historically has had a low kind of return. And even now with interest rates being so high, it's still 5 or 6%, which is a lot less than you can get at equity. However, it's because it's lowest in the capital stack, it has the lowest risk, right? They have to be first to get paid. And because you only will lend to a certain percentage of the property value, that means if you have to take over the property, you get this huge discount. And these days, depending on what type of loan you get, the amount that the loan proceeds, the amount of the loan is actually pretty little. So we got a loan recently, it was 60%. So that means if for some reason we can't pay, they just got a property at a 40% discount. So that's why they're okay with getting such a less amount of returns because it's very safe. It's the lowest in terms of risk. And however, it's also the lowest in terms of returns because all they get is they'll get their principal back plus that interest, and the interest is pretty low. So if you think about it, their incentives is to really only lend to people that they know for sure will be able to pay that back because they don't have any upside. So they don't want to do things that are opportunistic, that are risky, right? Second to them is junior debt. And so people have different kind of risk tolerances. It's a little bit riskier because they get paid only after senior debt. So because of that, they're actually able to ask for a higher return. So mezzanine debt will be anywhere from 6 to 10%, and it's for a lesser amount. So I've seen mezzanine debt as 12, 13, 14, 15%. But because, say, the senior debt is at 70% of the value, the mezzanine debt will only be 10%. So if you combine those two, right, let's say 5 or 6% at 70% and 10% at 12%, the blended rate, even if it's 5 plus 12, it'll be around like 6%. So the total rate, if you combine it together, a weighted average ends up not being that bad. The benefit along with that is higher returns. However, it's also higher risk. And next is preferred equity. It's kind of in the middle. It's between debt and equity. One of the nice things about debt is you get paid every month, or you can take the property back. And preferred equity is similar. You have something called soft pay and hard pay. Hard pay is the amount that you need to get paid every month, just like debt. And you have some claim to the property if that is not paid. And that's, it's a reasonable amount. It varies depending on the deal. The last preferred equity deal we did, it was 8%. So every month we'd have to pay them 8%. And there is a soft pay. So at the very end of the deal, when you sell the property, they want to get to a certain amount. And this is all negotiable. So that means they actually get some of the upside, unlike debt. So that's why they're willing to be a little bit riskier, because they get some of that upside. However, unlike common equity, it's capped. So our last deal, I think it was capped at 12 or 13%. So if you think about it, if you have a deal that you're expecting 15% IRR and you could get preferred equity at like a 12% IRR, it actually increases the returns for the common equity investors, because that 3% delta, the 3% difference, will go to the common equity. But you still have the risk, right? Because you have that hard pay of 8% every year. And then lastly, you have common equity. So they're the highest in the capital stack, the last to get paid, but they don't have a cap on upside. So whatever money is left over when everyone else gets paid, and hopefully that's a lot, that gets paid to common equity. So that's kind of the capital stack. Those are kind of the four parts. You can have any combination. Usually you'll just have senior debt and common equity. Every once in a while, you'll have common equity, senior debt, and mezzanine debt. And sometimes you'll have common equity, senior debt, and preferred equity. So you always have common equity, you always have debt, and you could either have mezzanine debt or preferred equity. And just kind of depends on the terms of either. It's all negotiable, and preferred equity is usually more flexible in the terms of the terms that they give you. Now, we talked about the topic of this is debt funds versus debt deals. And some of you may have seen that we have a debt fund that's just about to close. And there's a couple different types of debt. And when you're considering debt, think about you're the bank. You're going to get a note, meaning, hey, so-and-so is going to pay you back for this. And you got to think about, hey, what kind of debt am I giving out? So different companies will take corporate debt, and corporate debt actually has pretty good likelihood of getting paid back. And so like Coca-Cola would be like, hey, we want to build a new factory. We need debt. So they can either go to banks or they can go to our investor. And that's kind of what our debt fund is. And you can have it very specific for a thing, saying, hey, we're getting debt for this specific factory, right? Or you can say, hey, we're taking debt as a company, and we're going to use that for anything that potentially we could use in the future. Or you can say, hey, we are creating a debt fund, and we're going to use it for these 10 things, 10 different factories. So you got to think about, hey, what is this backed by? What is the guarantee on it, right? And is it a fund? Is it for a very specific thing, or is it for multiple things? Just like there's a single syndication and a single fund. So with debt funds are usually tied to properties. So they'll say, hey, we are raising this $10 million debt fund. We're going to lend. It's usually bridge lending, so it's variable interest rates. We're going to lend to these X, Y, and Z things. And you got to see what kind of stuff are they going to lend out to? And importantly, so one, what kind of criteria are they using? But two, what happens if someone defaults? The people that I like to invest, if I ever do debt, I like to have companies that they're vertically integrated, that they can take over the property and run it, right? Because then say you did a 70% loan, that means you just got a 30% discount on the property. However, maybe that property is actually worth 30% less, or maybe it's worth 50% less. I think across the board right now in real estate, properties have values are down, which is fine. As long as you don't sell it, or you have to sell it, or you have to refinance, it's not that big of an issue. But that 30% discount you got might actually not be worth that much. So you might hear of properties being underwater. What it means is the mortgage, the amount owed to the bank is actually higher than the value of the property. And this happened a lot in 2008, 2009, where people just walked away from the properties. And a lot of banks were stuck with these properties that they didn't know what to do with. And we're starting to see a little bit of that in the commercial real estate market. I think probably not going to see that as much because lenders are more willing to negotiate, because for a single family home, for a bank to take that back, it's not that much work. But to take back a $60 million property with its own multiple employees, and it's really a business, it's a lot of work. And to have to do that for multiple properties is not something that most banks want to do. So I personally, the other thing to keep in mind, so debt versus equity. Debt, unfortunately, is taxed at your normal income. So if you're on a 37% tax bracket, like most of us physicians are, that's what you're getting taxed at. So one of the tips is to put debt into your retirement account. So you can either do a self-directed IRA. However, most debt funds are limited to how many they can take. But if you have a solo 401k, debt funds can take as many of those investors as you can. And now you have something that's making a really good return and you're not really taxed on it. Well, equity, it has the favorable tax preference because you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about being taxed because you have depreciation over the lifetime of the deal until you sell that property. So that's kind of a general overview. Debt has become really interesting over the past couple of, I'd say last year, because the federal rate used to be 0%. And so usually people add 2-3% to that to give you a loan. So for example, we were getting loans at around 2 or 3%. I bought my house in 21, it was 2.3%. My rental property in 2017 was 4.3%. So really good rates. And so that means the bank is getting a 2.3% return on their money, which is basically inflation. So that's not really enticing to most people. However, now rates are 6, 7, 8% and even higher. So that's starting to become something that's really enticing. And it's a low risk. So we've seen, especially mezzanine loans at anywhere from 10 to 15%. So that can be really, really enticing to people because it's hard on the equity side to get 10 to 15%. Because as debt deals, as their rates have gotten higher, equity returns have gotten lower, right? Because a majority of your money is now going to your debt payments. And also, as interest rates go up with the Federal Reserve, not only are you paying more in interest payments, but everything is starting to become more expensive, right? So labor, materials, all that stuff. And that's kind of the goal, right? The Federal Reserve wants to increase the cost of everything so that inflation goes down. And it's kind of a way of turning down the really hot economy. The problem is economy continues to be pretty hot. If anyone looked at the September job report, it was 300,000, which is insane. So unfortunately for us in real estate, it looks like the interest rates might still be going up. We were hoping that they would drop by the end of the year. It's looking that maybe might plateau in 24 and potentially drop in at the end of 24, but it's really kind of hit or miss. So that's kind of debt funds, and the capital stack in a nutshell. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat. I'll take a quick look. Nothing too interesting in there. Let's see, what else can I talk about debt? Often, so this is getting a little bit more complicated. Even so, say there's a loan of 70%, banks will take that and cut it up. They'll say, hey, the first tranche, they call it, of 0 to 30% is super duper safe. And they'll sell that to someone else. Then next, 20% is less safe, and the last, let's say 15% is the least safe of those, right? So in order of getting paid, it'll go, the different tranches depending on how it is loan to value. And that's something that, depending on who you are and what you're investing in, you can invest in different tranches. But that's usually done on kind of a larger scale. And we're starting to look at different debt deals. The problem is there's not much for us to add. We only try to really go in and add when there's something that we specifically can do. But there's a bunch of good debt companies out there and for you to invest. So we personally, as Ascent, we don't have a ton to add to make them better. So, they can kind of do their thing. We never want to be just another one of something and have to charge our fees on top of their fees if they can just do it just as well without us. So we're looking at debt. We're looking at preferred equity. I think that would be really interesting. And especially if we can have hard pay that's high enough. It's nice to get monthly income that's recurring, as opposed to equity, where a lot of times you have to hold distributions for the first year and a half, and you really get a majority of your income at the end. Preferred equity is kind of more streamlined, and debt is very consistent. Preferred equity is more consistent with a little pop at the end, and equity is a little bit here and there, but really the biggest pop at the end. Cool. If no one has any questions, that's it for this talk about debt. In terms of deals, we're actually looking at a lot of deals right now. It seems like the floodgates have opened, which is interesting because this time of the year is very rare to have actually deals. But I think the rest of the year, we haven't seen much at all. So it's kind of, the whole mechanism is getting unfrozen and people want to get deals. So we're getting a lot of deals, a lot of distress, which is good for us. And we're really focusing on long-term fixed rate interest rates so that we can really ride out whatever. And I think after 2025, I think things are going to go very well. And right now, it's a lot of money on the sidelines just waiting to put into multifamily. And I think what they're really waiting for is the Federal Reserve to try to get some stability, because right now they're like, are they going to increase interest rates? Are they not? Are they? And they keep going back and forth. But once we have that plateau and they say, hey, we're not going to raise interest rates for a while because inflation seems to be handled, I think a lot of money is going to pour into real estate. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.